Settle in for a moment. This won't be about castles or knights or banners. This is about distance, and about the machines that turned distance into a weapon. Throughout medieval warfare, there were engines that forced armies to climb walls, and engines that made those walls meaningless long before anyone touched them. Today, it's the second kind, the machines that spoke first. The trebuchet was the sovereign of that language. Gravity-driven, deliberate, built like a verdict more than a machine. It sent stones weighing hundreds of kilograms in graceful, murderous arcs. It didn't rely on mood or weather or muscle. It relied on physics, and physics never blinked. When a trebuchet appeared on the horizon, it wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. Before it, the mangonel ruled, a torsion engine twisted from sinew and rope, storing violence in fibers wound to breaking. Its shots were less predictable, its range shorter, its payload scattered. But in the early medieval world, that didn't matter. Castles were close, walls were low. Anything that could be thrown over was enough to make defenders reconsider their mourning. Mangonels were the workhorses of raiders, frontier lords, and armies without engineers. Build it, twist it, fire it. Crude, but convincing. Then there was the ballista, the one machine that didn't bother with curves. No arcs, no theatrics, just a line. A straight, deadly line. It fired bolts as long as a man's arm and heavier than a spear, slicing through shield walls, gates, advancing ranks, and, when a commander was unlucky, the commander himself. It was the closest thing the medieval world had to a sniper. Quiet, precise, and violently persuasive. Below it on the evolutionary ladder kicked the onager, a vertical torsion thrower that lived up to its name. Every shot recoiled like a wild donkey breaking free, its frame buckling, its arm snapping upward with brute, unrefined power. It wasn't elegant, but walls didn't care about elegance. Defenders answered with the Scorpio, a miniature ballista built for wall tops. Light, fast, narrow, and placed exactly where archers couldn't hold alone. Its bolts didn't stop sieges, they slowed them. And sometimes, slowing was enough. And before the crossbow democratized lethality, before engineering replaced strength, there was the gastraphetes, the belly bow, the earliest mechanical promise that a soldier didn't need exceptional arms to kill exceptionally well. Yet projectile engines launched more than stone and iron. When commanders wanted fear to travel faster than rock, they filled clay jars with Greek fire, that clinging liquid flame that didn't wait for impact to matter. Thrown by trebuchets or mangonels, it didn't burn walls, it burned certainty. These were the machines that changed the opening chapter of a siege. Not the ladders, not the rams, not the towers. The throwers. The engines that rewrote the battlefield from afar. Machines that didn't ask for permission. Machines that simply lifted, swung, released, and let gravity finish the sentence. If medieval warfare had a signature sound, it wasn't steel on steel. It was the slow, heavy exhale of a counterweight rising, and the world holding its breath while it fell. The trebuchet didn't argue with the wall. It explained to the wall that resistance was irrelevant. A trebuchet was physics made militant. A long throwing arm balanced on a massive axle. A sling that turned momentum into reach. And at its heart, a counterweight. Sometimes stone, sometimes lead, sometimes whatever rubble the engineers could shovel in, pulling the arm downward with implacable certainty. Not sudden, not explosive, measured, inevitably measured. Constructing one wasn't improvisation. It required carpenters, masons, rope makers, oxen, wagons, and a chain of labor that stretched days or weeks. You didn't bring a trebuchet to a siege. You grew it there, piece by piece, beam by beam, until a wooden skeleton stood tall enough to throw a boulder farther than any bow could dream. Once anchored, usually just outside arrow range, the trebuchet didn't move again. It didn't need to. It wasn't built to chase. It was built to end things. Its shots followed a perfect arc, a geometry that defenders learned to watch with dread. A stone rising slow, cresting quiet, then dropping with a sound that was less an impact and more a verdict. Walls cracked, towers bowed, courtyards exploded in dust. But the physical damage was only half the point. The psychological damage traveled farther. A trebuchet didn't fire rapidly. One shot could take 20 minutes to reset. But every shot was a statement. A city under trebuchet range didn't sleep. It waited, and waiting breaks people faster than stone breaks. In the hands of European kingdoms, crusading armies, Byzantine engineers, or Mongol strategists, the trebuchet became more than a machine. It became a negotiation tactic. A signal that talks were over. A reminder that the wall was not a sanctuary, only a delay. And yet, the trebuchet had weaknesses. It was stationary, vulnerable to counter-artillery, fire, storms, and sabotage. If engineers misjudged weight or angle, stones fell short or sailed uselessly beyond the target. But even flawed trebuchets accomplished their purpose. They forced defenders to react, to divert resources, to tremble. For 300 years, nothing matched its power. Not speed, not precision, but certainty. When the trebuchet fired, the result wasn't random. It was direction, momentum, and gravity, all speaking the same language. And when they spoke together, cities listened. Before the trebuchet took over the horizon, siege warfare spoke in shorter sentences, sharper, rougher, and far less predictable. The early projectile engines didn't throw with elegance. They threw with impatience. And in the tight, brutal geometry of early medieval fortifications, that was often enough. The mangonel was the first to answer when walls needed shaking, powered by torsion. Ropes of sinew twisted until they begged to snap. It hurled stones in steep arcs that defenders couldn't always track or dodge. Accuracy wasn't its concern. Survival was. It was compact enough to build on site, light enough to reposition, simple enough that a raiding lord with a few carpenters could throw something dangerous over a wall before sunset. A mangonel shot didn't sound like engineering. It sounded like tension giving up. Then came the ballista, the machine that refused to lob anything. Where the mangonel threw, the ballista pierced. 2 torsion springs on either side, a straight track, a trigger, and a bolt as long as a man's arm. It didn't aim at walls. It aimed at the people who trusted the walls. Shield bearers, standard bearers, siege engineers, commanders making the mistake of standing where they could be seen. The ballista wasn't splash damage. It was intent. Cold, straight, and personal. But long before either of them, before medieval engineers refined their calculations, there was the onager, the wild one. Named after a donkey that kicks without warning, it earned the title. 1 vertical arm, 1 twisting skein of rope, 1 violent upward snap. A recoil so fierce crews had to brace the entire machine with earth, stones, or their own weight. The onager didn't negotiate with targets. It announced itself, fired, and broke itself slightly every time. And yet, in forgotten valleys and half-abandoned border forts, commanders kept building them. They were loud, they were unstable, they were crude, but they threw rocks. And sometimes throwing rocks was all a garrison needed to feel less alone. Each of these machines, mangonel, ballista, onager, carried limitations so obvious that later engineers couldn't ignore them. Torsion weakened in rain, wood warped, ropes snapped, shots curved wrong, flew short, or misfired entirely. But for centuries, these were the tools available, and armies didn't wait for perfection. They used what they had. Together, they formed the first mechanical vocabulary of siege warfare. Short range, high tension, unpredictable, but always enough to shake confidence on the other side of the wall. They didn't end sieges. They started them. If the big engines dictated the shape of a siege, the smaller ones dictated its heartbeat. Not every fight was about walls. Some were about the narrow spaces between them. Battlements, towers, ladders, and courtyards, where seconds mattered more than stone. The Scorpio lived there, a compact torsion weapon built to fit on a wall top, turning defenders from targets into hunters. Light enough to swivel fast, strong enough to punch a bolt through armor at close range, silent until release. It didn't change the outcome of a siege. It changed the minutes before the outcome, when ladders touched stone and men hesitated at the last rung. Then there was the gastraphetes, small, ancient, almost forgotten. The belly bow that let a soldier without exceptional strength launch a bolt with mechanical certainty. It wasn't meant for armies. It was meant for individuals, for the lone defender in a tower window, for the city militia on the parapet. It was the first hint in warfare that lethality didn't need muscle. It only needed leverage. The crossbow made that hint permanent. A weapon that took the logic of the gastraphetes and scaled it into something armies could rely on. Simple, reproducible, lethal. A crossbowman didn't train for years. He trained for afternoons, and by evening he could kill a knight. It broke the hierarchy of the battlefield. It gave precision to cities, navies, militias, and mercenaries who had no place in heroic tales. Walls defended people, but crossbows defended walls. And then, Greek fire. Not a machine, but a message packaged in clay. Thrown by mangonels or trebuchets, the liquid flame didn't just ignite. It clung, crawled, and refused to die. Stone didn't burn, but courage did. Defenders didn't fear the fire. They feared the idea that once it landed, no amount of water could save them. Together, these weapons didn't replace siege towers or battering rams. They didn't end the ancient dance of assault and defense. But they stretched the battlefield. They turned space into danger, time into pressure, distance into inevitability. That was the true power of projectile engines, not the stones, not the bolts, not even the fire. It was the reminder that a siege didn't begin at the gate. It began the moment something rose into the air and no one could stop it. Trebuchets broke walls. Mangonels broke rhythm. Ballistae broke certainty. Onagers broke silence. Scorpios broke ladders. Crossbows broke hierarchies. Greek fire broke composure. And all of them broke something deeper, the illusion that distance was safety. That was the arsenal of a siege, and its legacy isn't what it destroyed, but how far its reach could travel before the first soldier ever took a step.